Welcome to AI Podcasts. Today we'll discuss the most important current affairs from the Indian Express 19 May 2026 edition with detailed analysis for UPSC aspirants. You can access today's notes from the description box below. Your comments and feedback help us improve and create better content for aspirants every day. Thank you for supporting AI Podcast. For today's deep dive, we're really tracing the delicate balance of power, across all these different fronts.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we're looking at everything from local governance and citizens' rights all the way to macroeconomic pressures on the rupee.
Right, and even wrapping up with India's strategic maneuvers on the global stage. Let's start at the grassroots. The Uttar Pradesh cabinet just approved a state-dedicated backward classes commission.
They did, yeah. And the goal here is to determine OBC reservations in Panchayati Raj institutions, which covers over 8 lakh posts.
That's a massive scale. But, they can't just announce a quota. They have to comply with what the Supreme Court calls the triple test.
Exactly. The triple test is basically the judiciary's way of ensuring that these quotas don't just, devolve into arbitrary vote bank politics. It's a very strict 3-step mechanism.
Okay, so how does it actually work?
First, the state has to set up a dedicated commission. Second, that commission can't just use general census data. They have to conduct a specific empirical inquiry into political backwardness in local body elections.
Right, so not just social or educational backwardness.
Exactly. And third, the final proportion of reservation can't breach the 50% ceiling, with the OBC quota strictly capped at 27%.
I always compare this triple test to like a strict architectural blueprint. I mean, you might have the materials and the desire to build the house or implement the quota, but you can't just pour concrete wherever.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
You have to prove the foundation is structurally sound through empirical data. If you don't do those soil tests, the whole thing collapses under judicial scrutiny.
Right, and the timing of this data collection is critical. Local body elections are basically the ultimate testing ground for demographic mobilization.
Especially looking ahead to the 2027 UP Assembly elections, right?
Exactly. Capturing influence across those 8 lakh posts is how you build bargaining power. It's a massive political exercise.
Yeah, and this focus on local demographic influence really leads into a much larger national crisis regarding representation. We have this fascinating op-ed from Devesh Kapoor and Arvind Subramanian about the growing democratic deficit in India.
Right, they're tackling the whole delimitation debate.
Exactly. So just to give you, the listener, some background here, political representation in parliament has been frozen based on the 1971 census.
Okay.
That freeze was meant to encourage population control, but it expires in 2026.
And the consequence of that freeze is this stark demographic divergence. I mean, the southern states and parts of the West, they successfully stabilized their population growth. But the Hindi heartland continued to grow rapidly.
So what happens if we reapportion seats today based on current numbers?
Well, the math is incredibly disruptive. The 4 southern states would lose 23 seats in parliament, while 4 northern states like Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and UP would actually gain 31 seats.
Wait, isn't this essentially penalizing the southern and western states for their own success in population control and economic growth?
It's a huge point of contention, yes.
I mean, especially when you look at the fiscal transfers the authors mention. The Hindi heartland receives 90% more than it contributes, while the south and west receive between 44 and 58% less.
Right, and that's the exact tension the authors are warning about. In any federal system, wealth redistribution is a tool of nation building. Wealthier regions subsidize poorer ones to ensure a baseline of public good.
Sure, that makes sense on paper.
But the authors argue that when you pair financial subsidy with political disenfranchisement, it risks turning cooperative federalism into combative federalism.
Oh, wow. So it really erodes trust.
Exactly. Resolving this requires serious democratic sensibility and compromise from the powerful center. It's not just about updating a spreadsheet.
That makes total sense. So we're seeing this massive stress on the structure of federalism, but there's also intense stress on the constitutional rights of the individual, specifically regarding prolonged incarceration.
Right, we're moving from the macro to the micro here.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court just expressed very serious reservations about lower benches denying bail under the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. They recently granted bail to Syed Iftikhar Andrabi, who had been in custody without trial since 2020.
To really understand this, you have to look at Section 43D5 of the UAPA. It makes getting bail notoriously difficult. Back in 2019, the Watali ruling interpreted this so strictly that bail was almost impossible.
But didn't they issue a corrective precedent recently?
They did. In the 2021 KA the Jeep case, the Supreme Court ruled that this strict bail embargo basically melts down when a trial is endlessly delayed because that violates Article 21, the right to life in a speedy trial.
Okay, but here's my question. If the Supreme Court already set a clear precedent in 2021 that prolonged incarceration violates Article 21, why are smaller benches still issuing divergent rulings?
That's the real friction point.
Because, the reports mention smaller benches denying bail in cases like Umar Khalid and Sharjeel Imam, seemingly relying on the older 2019 Watali ruling.
Well, it highlights the concept of a polyvocal court. The Supreme Court isn't just one monolithic voice. It has multiple benches of different sizes hearing cases.
Right.
But the SC used the Andrabi case to firmly remind everyone about judicial discipline, or stare decisis. Smaller benches must follow the precedent set by larger benches, or refer the matter to the Chief Justice. They can't just dilute them.
And the stats they cite are just abysmal. UAPA conviction rates are only around 2 to 6% nationally, and less than 1% in Jammu and Kashmir. So the legal process basically becomes the punishment.
Precisely. And speaking of judicial discipline, this actually connects to another major SC intervention, this time regarding the administrative powers of the high courts themselves.
Oh, right, the Deepali Sharma case.
Exactly. She was a civil judge removed from service over allegations of torturing a minor domestic help. The High Court Registrar General basically took suo motu, or independent action, to initiate disciplinary proceedings against her.
But the Supreme Court stepped in, right, not to judge the facts of the abuse case, but because of procedural boundaries.
Yes, the SC ruled that a Registrar General cannot independently initiate disciplinary action against a judicial officer. It explicitly requires the prior approval of the Chief Justice.
Wow, so it's really about preventing the abuse of administrative power within the judiciary itself.
Right. Even with horrific allegations, the constitutional scheme has to be strictly followed.
Absolutely. So pivoting from the legal landscape to our economic landscape, because just like the judiciary, the Indian rupee is under massive stress. It just hit a new all-time low of 96.4 against the US dollar.
Yeah, the macroeconomic headwinds are severe right now.
Foreign portfolio investors have pulled out $22.4 billion so far in 2026. And HSBC estimates a balance of payments deficit of $65 billion for FY27. Plus, global crude oil surged past $110 a barrel after a drone attack in the UAE.
Right, and since we import over 80% of our crude oil, that price spike just inflates our import bill instantly.
I always think of our economy here like a leaky bucket. We are, pouring out massive amounts of foreign exchange to buy this super expensive oil, while foreign investors are actively siphoning their capital out of the holes in the bottom.
The leaky bucket analogy is spot on, but there's a critical nuance that HSBC points out. The worsening of India's balance of payments actually predates the current $110 oil crisis.
Wait, really? So it's not just the energy shock?
No, the energy crisis definitely accelerates it, but there are deeper structural shifts happening. We're seeing a slump in foreign direct investment, a flight of portfolio capital that was already dragging us into a deficit.
So the bucket was already leaking before the oil prices spiked, which explains India's strategic response with Russian oil.
Exactly. When oil is that expensive, you have to find a discount.
Right, and the U.S. recently let its sanctions waiver on Russian oil expire. But India's petroleum ministry stated they'll continue to buy Russian oil regardless of the waiver. Isn't India playing with fire here? By ignoring the expired U.S. waiver, aren't we risking secondary sanctions?
Well, from New Delhi's perspective, this is driven by commercial viability and baseline energy security. The waiver used to let Indian refiners deal directly with sanctioned firms safely.
But now they're doing it without the safety net.
Right. But they assert it's a necessity because the Strait of Hormuz closure has cut off access to a huge volume of traditional Gulf barrels. They have to offset that loss to keep the domestic economy running.
And that closure of the Strait of Hormuz isn't just choking oil, it's choking standard trade, too. Which leads us to the new India-Oman Free Trade Agreement, or CEPA.
Slated to enter into force by June 1st, yes. This is a critical bypass.
Because Oman's major ports, like Salalah and Duqm, fall outside the Strait of Hormuz, right? So India can just reroute exports through Oman to West Asia and Africa.
Exactly. Oman's geographic location makes it an invaluable transit window, especially when traditional partners like the UAE become logistically difficult to reach safely.
Which explains why Oman shipments jumped 246% in April. And 98% of Indian goods will get zero-duty access there.
Yeah, the domestic market in Oman is only about $40 billion, but the transit access is what really dictates this trade policy amidst geopolitical choke points.
It's all connected. Speaking of geopolitics, let's look at the tech side. The U.S.-China critical minerals dispute. The White House just acknowledged that China's export controls on rare earths will remain.
And specifically, China has restricted indium, which is crucial for photonic chips and 6G networks. Their exports of indium have plummeted by two-thirds globally.
So how does this actually impact the average person listening right now?
Well, indium is basically essential for the AI data centers and next-gen tech the entire world relies on.
Oh, wow. So it's a foundational material.
Exactly. It proves that leverage in the modern tech war isn't just about software or coders. It's literally about controlling the physical raw materials dug out of the ground.
That's intense. And it makes sense why India is aggressively forging new global partnerships to secure sustainable alternatives, like the third India-Nordic summit, with PM Modi visiting Oslo and Gothenburg.
Right. India-Norway elevated ties to a green strategic partnership, focusing on space, health, and digital development.
And India and Sweden are pushing the next phase of LEDIT, which is all about decarbonizing heavy industries.
Yeah, LEDIT stands for the Leadership Group for Industry Transition. What we're seeing here is India leveraging its sheer scale and implementation speed with Nordic technology and capital.
So it's basically the China plus one strategy playing out in green tech.
Exactly. It's co-creating clean tech solutions to avoid relying on single choke points.
And while these international partnerships are trying to protect the Earth's climate, there's another fascinating partnership studying how the Earth protects itself, the SMILE mission.
The Solar Wind Magnetosphere Ionosphere Link Explorer. It's launching on a Vega C rocket to study the Earth's magnetosphere, which, shields us from solar winds.
But wait, I found a huge contradiction here. We just talked about the US and China locked in this bitter tech and mineral war, yet the SMILE mission is a joint collaboration between the European Space Agency and China.
I know it sounds contradictory, but space weather, like massive solar storms, threatens all satellites and astronauts equally, regardless of nationality.
Oh, I see. So the danger is just too big to ignore.
Right. The scientific imperative forces collaboration even when there's intense geopolitical fragmentation on the ground.
Okay, so bringing this conversation back down to Earth and specifically back home to India. We are looking to the stars to understand our magnetic shield, but we are completely neglecting our ecological shields right here.
You're talking about the Saranda forest dispute in Jharkhand.
Yes. The state government is delaying a Supreme Court order to notify 314 square kilometers of those forests as a wildlife sanctuary. They're filing review petitions instead.
And their claim is that conservation hurts indigenous rights.
Right. Exactly. But the SC clarified that the Forest Rights Act already protects those communities. The real issue is that habitat loss from rampant mining has forced wild elephants into human settlements, killing over 1,300 people between 2000 and 2023.
That's a devastating statistic.
It's literally like tearing down the structural walls of your house to mine the bricks, and then acting shocked when wild animals from outside wander into your living room.
That analogy hits hard. It really highlights this classic clash between executive action, driven by mining interests, and judicial directives aimed at environmental protection.
Yeah.
Framing it as a choice between forests and indigenous people is a false dichotomy. It totally ignores long-term ecological security.
Exactly. Well, we've covered incredible ground today. We navigated representation and fundamental rights at home, grappled with the sinking rupee and choked trade routes, and mapped out how India is securing critical minerals and green tech globally.
And, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. As India actively builds these green strategic partnerships with Nordic countries to save the global climate, the executive delays in protecting our own Saranda forests reveal a pretty glaring paradox.
That's a great point.
Are we prioritizing international green optics while quietly allowing our domestic ecological fortresses to be mined away?
That is definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.